He cried out for justice, and heaven remained silent. The walls of Judah still stood, but inside, everything had already crumbled. The streets were flooded with violence. The leaders steeped in corruption. The righteous silenced, crushed. And while the people pleaded for relief, the heavens seemed shut, as if God had turned his face away. It is in this setting that Habakkuk emerges, not with an answer, but with a question. He does not speak to the people. He writes no decrees. He turns his gaze straight upward, with the boldness of one who has lost the fear of being misunderstood. How long, Lord? His voice does not carry intellectual doubt, but spiritual anguish. Habakkuk never questions God's existence. He questions the silence, because the problem wasn't the chaos. It was the fact that God saw it all, and apparently did nothing. What if heaven hears, but chooses not to act? What if God's silence is part of the plan? He felt suffocated by a mystery few dared to touch, the mystery of divine justice that delays, of impunity that thrives, of pain that repeats without answer. Habakkuk wasn't just the voice of a people, he was the embodiment of a theological crisis. How can a holy God coexist with a world unraveling? Why does the promise feel so distant when evil multiplies? This is the kind of biblical mystery no temple sacrifice could explain, and no priest seemed willing to face. But Habakkuk does. He does not look away. He doesn't pretend to understand. He doesn't stay silent to appear faithful, because he knew that true faithfulness is not measured by silence, but by the courage to cry out, even when the answer never comes. His soul was restless. Not because he doubted God's goodness, but because he trusted it so deeply he could not understand its absence. And it is precisely there that the strength of this prophet is born, not from understanding, but from unrest, not from certainty, but from the insistence on asking. Habakkuk does not blaspheme. He does not accuse. He does not walk away, but he refuses to pretend that everything is fine. This raw, vulnerable spiritual honesty is what makes his prayer just as vital today as it was more than 2,500 years ago, because he does not speak from a distant throne. He speaks from the pain we have all felt. When justice fails, when the righteous are crushed, when evil advances, and heaven remains silent. And at the end of that first cry, there was no answer, no thunder, no fire, no revelation. Only the echo of a plea that has echoed through the centuries. How long, Lord, shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? It wasn't just a lament. What came from Habakkuk's lips that morning was a direct confrontation, a spiritual risk. He was no longer just asking, now he was questioning the justice of heaven itself. Yes, the corruption in Judah was visible, but what hurt even more was the sense that the eternal throne, the one where righteousness dwells, was allowing it all to continue. The law had become paralyzed. Justice never showed up. The wicked surrounded the righteous and walked away unpunished. Habakkuk stood before God not as someone irreverent, but as someone desperately faithful. Too faithful to accept that evil could prevail. Too faithful to pretend he didn't see, faithful enough not to walk away, and that's precisely why he cried out. "Why dost thou make me to behold iniquity?" he asked, as if saying, if you're not going to act, why let me feel this much pain? That prayer held more courage than many sweet words ever could, because it came from a man who loved God's truth so deeply that he refused to accept his silence. And here we uncover the prophet's deepest weakness. He was afraid of losing his faith. Habakkuk still believed, but he could already feel the ground slipping away. He was the picture of someone who prays without feeling anything in return, who seeks but sees no sign, who loves God but begins to question how he rules. How many times have we been there, when we kneel, not with formulas, but with wounds, when we pray, and deep inside, a whisper says, will he really answer this time? If that pain also cries out in you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, the questions aren't ignored, they're brought to the altar. And then something unexpected happens. God answers. But not the way Habakkuk hoped, not with immediate restoration, not with comfort, not with a soothing explanation. God speaks, and the answer is judgment. I will raise up the Chaldeans. That phrase, short and sharp like an arrow, pierces the prophet's heart. The Chaldeans, a ruthless people, pagan, savage. How could a just God choose a nation more wicked than Judah to be his instrument of correction? Here, a new secret of the Bible is revealed, a truth that shatters the framework of religious thinking. God cannot be domesticated. His justice does not fit inside human expectations. His plan is holy, even when it makes no sense to us. This is Habakkuk's first theological shock, and the audience's as well. Because until now, the pain of silence was bearable. But now, the answer has come, and it is terrifying. Habakkuk doesn't understand, but something inside him hasn't broken. Because true faith isn't the kind that understands everything. It's the kind that still stands, even in the face of what destroys all certainties. This is the point where many abandon prayer. Habakkuk doesn't. He chooses to continue, even in the face of divine judgment that defies logic, but not holiness. They did not march with honor. They came without fear. The Chaldeans advanced like a storm no one could contain. Wherever they passed, the earth burned. Wherever they arrived, kingdoms fell silent. They were swift as leopards, ruthless as wolves at dusk. Their horses seemed to spit fire, their archers hungry for blood. The description God gave was not a warning, it was a decree. It was written with the weight of an eternal decision. Behold, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation. Words that Habakkuk could hardly bear to hear. Those words did not come from the enemy. They came from the very throne he had so earnestly sought. It was the Lord who was raising up that cruel people, a people who did not know the name of God, but who would now carry out his command. This was the mystery that burned in the prophet's heart. How could the Holy One act through the impure? How could the Righteous One use the wicked? It was a spiritual collision, the holiness he knew against the reality before his eyes. Habakkuk did not remain silent, but now his voice was not one of accusation. It was one of astonishment, a man who believed he was ready to hear, but who, when he heard, saw his world collapse. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil. Wherefore then dost thou look upon them that deal treacherously? So cried Habakkuk, as it is written in chapter 1, verses 12 and 13 of his book. His words no longer came from doubt. They came from the apparent contradiction between what he believed and what he saw. It was not just the judgment, it was the way it would come. Not by the hand of an angel, but by the fists of wicked, arrogant men, hungry for domination. Those who worshipped their own strength as gods, those who bowed to the sword, those who mocked nations and turned justice into a joke. To Habakkuk, this was not merely incomprehensible. It was a threat to his very understanding of the character of God. This is where the spiritual turning point happens, because the crisis is no longer about the people, it is about God. When the prophet sees the Holy One using impure instruments, he is forced to face a deeper reality. God is sovereign even over the wicked. He is not subject to human logic. He does not need to conform to what we call right. He is light, yes, but also a consuming fire. And in that fire, Habakkuk begins to be purified. His concepts are burned away, his certainties undone. The faith he once knew can no longer survive. A new one must be born. A faith not based on visible rewards, but on a God who rules even over chaos, and who is just even when it doesn't seem so. This is the breaking point that many try to avoid, when God no longer fits into our theological interpretation. But this is where the true worshipper remains. Habakkuk does not run, he does not reject. He is shaken, but he remains. And deep down, a new conviction begins to rise. If even the wicked are in God's hands, then nothing escapes his rule. No evil is free. No empire advances without limits. No injustice is eternal. Even the judgment that comes with destruction fulfills an eternal purpose. He could have given up. He could have gone home, bowed his head, and ended his questions. But he didn't. Habakkuk climbed. He ascended to a place where only those who still hope can remain. The watchtower was not just a structure. It was a symbol, a space between the ground of doubt and the sky of revelation. There, alone, he chose to stay, not to complain, not to shout again, but to wait. I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me. That was his choice. It was not passivity. It was a faith that keeps watch, a trust that observes, a hope that, though weary, still looks upward. In that moment, there was no answer, no signs, only the wind and the silence. But the prophet stood firm. Something within him had changed. He no longer demanded that God explain himself, only that he speak. And then the answer came, not like thunder, but as instruction, clear, direct, undeniable. Write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. That command, simple on the surface, holds one of the greatest biblical mysteries. For God was revealing something that had not yet come to pass, but that had to be written as if it were already certain. The vision was not for now, it was for the appointed time. And even though it seemed to delay, it would come. Unstoppable, unquestionable. God's timing is never late. It comes to pass when all else seems to have failed. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. That promise wasn't just for Habakkuk. It was for anyone who would one day climb their own tower, who would choose to remain even when the soul cries out, who would choose to wait even without understanding. Then came the phrase, the one that would not only change the course of the prophet, but would become a pillar of biblical faith for generations. The just shall live by his faith, not by what he sees, not by what he understands, not by what he feels, but by faith, by the certainty that even when judgment comes, God is still God. Habakkuk still saw no redemption. He still didn't know how the story would end, but he knew there was a calling, and that the vision, though hidden, had already begun to move. This is the kind of faith that sustains, not the kind that depends on miracles, but the kind that survives the silence, the judgment, the delay. The faith that dwells in the tower of waiting, of watching, of obedience, where faith does not give up, even when the heavens remain unanswered. Habakkuk stayed there. The people did not yet know. The Chaldeans were still on their way, but the prophet had already heard the word, and that was enough. The prophet had waited, and God spoke. But this time, not to bring comfort. The vision now unfolding was not about immediate hope, but about complete judgment, and not just for Judah. The very instrument of discipline, the Chaldeans, were also being weighed in the balance. For the judgment of God is not partial, it is absolute, holy, irrevocable. Then came the woes, not cries of pain, but divine sentences, hammers falling against pride, greed, violence, and idolatry. 5 prophetic declarations that exposed the hidden sins of the Chaldeans, but also echoed against any nation that exalted itself above justice. The first, woe, struck those who amassed wealth through oppression, those who built empires with innocent blood. The second condemned those who built cities with iniquity, raising palaces upon human ruin. The third was for those who exploited their neighbors to satisfy their lust and drunkenness. The fourth woe denounced idolatry, the trust placed in silent images crafted by human hands. The final one was the final blow, against the spiritual arrogance of those who believed they would never be touched. These 5 woes were not just words against Babylon. They were secrets of Scripture revealing how God judges both empires and hearts. What seemed like victory for the Chaldeans was merely the beginning of their downfall. for their throne was built upon ashes, and God shares his glory with no one. Each woe spoken was a revelation that judgment has a specific address, and even when God uses the wicked for a time, he never absolves them. This is one of the greatest theological insights of Habakkuk. Judgment does not choose sides, it chooses posture. It weighs both the righteous and the unrighteous with the same scale, but only the humble remain standing. And then, the climax. A promise pierced the silence. It is what the prophet recorded in the midst of the vision, that one day the entire earth would be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea, leaving no empty space. This was not just a vision of the future. It was a reminder evil will never have the final word. Chaos may seem to dominate, but one day, everything will be filled with the glory of God, not partially, not in pieces, but as the waters cover the sea completely. And right after this pinnacle of light comes the silence, a silence not of oppression, but of reverence. The Lord is in his holy temple, and before him the earth keeps silence. There is nothing more to say. The prophet does not respond. The vision has been written, the woes have been declared, heaven has spoken, and now the earth is silent. Because when God reveals the full extent of his judgment, even the proud realize no strength can endure forever before holiness. Habakkuk stood alone, but all of heaven had moved. The Chaldeans still marched, the people still suffered, but now a new certainty was established. Justice will not be forgotten, glory will come, and the judgment that once seemed unjust revealed something deeper. God sees everything, and no one remains unpunished forever. The vision ended, heaven grew silent, and now Habakkuk bows, not as before, in protest, but in reverence. The same man who once questioned now sings, not because he understood everything, but because he had seen enough. The justice that once seemed absent was merely delayed. The evil that seemed unchecked had already been marked for judgment, and the faith that once felt fragile had been transformed into worship. From the depths of the prophet's soul, a prayer emerges, but not just any prayer. It is a song marked by trembling, a praise that rises from one who walked through darkness and survived the light. He begins with a request. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years, not a cry for immediate relief, but a plea for God's plan to continue, even if it is harsh, even if it involves judgment. Because now he knows justice may wound, but it never fails. And as he sings, he remembers. His words take shape through the memories of the Exodus, of Sinai, of the plagues, of the parted seas. He relives the God who marched among lightning bolts and sent thunder before deliverance. But now, that memory comes with a new weight. The wrath of God is real, and it too is part of redemption. It's as if the thunder was no longer just noise, but a proclamation. Then comes the most intense scene of the entire story. Habakkuk trembles. Literally, he says, "My bones trembled, my lips quivered, rottenness entered into my bones." But he does not flee, he does not retreat. Even while trembling, he remains. Even while fearing, he sings. That image, a man stricken with awe, yet standing firm in worship, is one of the most powerful in all this biblical story, because it reveals the true fear of the Lord, not a terror that paralyzes, but a reverence that sustains. Habakkuk no longer cries out to change the world. He cries out for the strength to endure what is to come, because now he understands that evil will be judged, but before that, it will be permitted. And even so, God remains good. Amid the poetry of his prayer, he declares, "In wrath, remember mercy." Here lies the heart of a restored prophet. He is no longer at war with God. He is reconciled. The thunder no longer shakes his faith. Now it reveals its root. And as written in the words of the prophet in Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 16, the one who trembles before the glory is the same one who sings by faith. The chapter closes in a scene of silence, yet full of weight. there is no external relief. No good news has arrived. The Chaldeans still march. The fig tree is still barren, but something invisible has already changed. Habakkuk no longer sings to receive something. Now he sings because he has come to know the one behind it all, and that faith is greater than any answer. And so we come to the final scene. But there is no visible miracle, no national restoration, no sudden harvest. The landscape remains barren. The fig tree does not blossom. The vine bears no fruit. The field is empty, the stalls without flocks. Everything has failed, everything. But the prophet is no longer on his knees in despair. He is standing, singing, rejoicing, and he declares one of the most subversive words in all of Scripture. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Book of the prophet Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. That phrase changes everything, because it separates the faith that depends on evidence from the faith that survives collapse. Habakkuk no longer waits for an answer to change reality. He has been changed. And this is the deepest revelation of this theological interpretation. The true miracle is not always the harvest, but the faith that sings even in the desert, the faith that rejoices, not because it won, but because it trusted, and that is enough. He lost everything except the vision of who God is. And that redefined his joy, because those who trust in the character of God no longer depend on the circumstance. Those who see the eternal no longer need the seasons. This is the apex of faith. There is no more lament, no more demand, only trust. The world around still cries chaos, but Habakkuk's heart has found rest. This is the answer he had searched for from the beginning. It was not the end of injustice. It was the birth of a faith that survives judgment. The journey ends with the line that closes the arc of the entire narrative. He cried out, God answered, and now he sings, not because the world changed, but because he changed. If this story spoke to your faith, write in the comments what God spoke to you. Share it with someone who also needs to find hope in the midst of silence. Subscribe to continue hearing stories that do not ignore pain, but reveal the glory behind it. And if this video touched you in any way, leave your like. It helps the word reach those who need it most.